Hello and welcome to this Community Writing Center workshop. The Community Writing Center provides individual writing consultations and writing workshops for all writers in the Great Lakes Bay region free of charge. To learn more about our services, including virtual and face-to-face feedback on your writing, upcoming writing workshops, and our various writing contests and events, please visit our website at communitywritingcenter.com. This online workshop series is sponsored by funding from the Bay Area Community Foundation and the SVSU Center for Community Writing. Hi, I'm Kelly Fitzpatrick, a Michigan-based author and educator, and it is my pleasure to present to you this workshop on how to publish your writing. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's get started.
Welcome to our workshop on how to publish your writing. The purpose of this workshop is to learn some of the basics about the publication process. This workshop is appropriate for beginning and intermediate writers, or for more advanced writers who want a refresher or who are new to the short story format. The length will be approximately 60 minutes, and for materials you might want something to take notes, if desired, but it's not necessary. All of our workshops aim to create an inclusive, respectful, and productive environment for all writers. We aim to provide feedback, strategies, and resources writers need to improve their writing, and encourage collaboration between writers through active conversation and participation. Here's a quick preview of our workshop before we dive in. We'll start with an opening Quickwrite, then we'll move on to talking about types of publishers and how to find a good fit with your writing. We'll go over the steps in the submission cycle, talk about where to find markets for your writing. We'll go over some submissions terminology and talk about definitions. We'll discuss how to stay organized as you are submitting to multiple places and go over some additional tips. So let's start out with an opening Quickwrite here. For the next 5 minutes, I'd like you to write on the following 2 questions. The first one is, what do you think of when you hear the word publish? What is the difference in your mind between a published work and a non-published one? So there isn't a right or wrong answer here. We just want to see where you're starting with your conception of publication. And then the second question says, why are you interested in publishing your work? So go ahead and just jot down some notes for about 5 minutes. If you're not sure, that's okay. Just sort of mine whatever ideas come to the surface, and then we will dive into talking about these things in more detail. Okay, hopefully you were able to get some ideas written down for those two questions. Now, there are several different definitions of the word publish. The one that we're going to use today as our working definition is to publish written work is to make it public for others to read. So the idea of moving it from a personal, private sphere into the public eye. So people can go search for it and find it and read it, whether that means looking it up in an online magazine where it's published or buying a hard copy of it on Amazon. The idea is that it's out there in the ether that can be located and read. Now, for the second part, writers have a variety of reasons why they publish their work, and there are no right or wrong goals here. Some might include to preserve family history or memories, to share ideas with the world, for the accomplishment or as a career milestone, to contribute to a literary community, to have a portfolio of work, or for income as a profession. You might have written down some goals that are not on this list, and that's totally okay. Whatever your goals are, though, they're going to guide the choices that you make as you seek out opportunities to publish your work. So, for example, someone who is doing this for income as a profession or as a side job will likely care about the pay rate. Or that there is a pay rate to begin with for that particular market versus someone who is doing this just for fun or just to share their ideas with the world might care more about the readership or the circulation of the publication to get it in front of more people. So whatever your goals are, they're valid. They might change over time, but they're going to guide the choices you make and all the other things that we're going to talk about today as we go through and look at the different pieces of the publication process. So keep these goals in the back of your mind as we go here. So now we're going to move into a craft talk to discuss some definitions, best practices, and examples. So I want to start out just by talking about the different types of publishers. So a publisher is a company or an organization who takes work from individuals and publishes it, meaning they share it, usually either online, digitally, and or in print circulation. So that might be in a magazine, in a journal, or in a book. Now, there are different types of publishers or publishing houses. Traditional publishers are, you have the big five for like books, and then you also have short fiction publishers who kind of fit this definition. This is where the author submits a piece of writing to an editor, a literary agent, or to the publication itself, who then either accepts or rejects it. So the idea is you kind of submit it and it either gets the stamp of yes or no. Sometimes it comes back with we want edits, and then we'll decide on the acceptance. But traditional publishers tend to be very selective, meaning they only accept a small percentage of the pieces that are submitted to them. And they tend to be very large organizations who have a lot of moving pieces and lots of people employed by them. An independent press, sometimes called an indie press or an indie publisher, they work similarly. Usually they have a submission process, but the small press is, from the name, going to be smaller. They're not part of the large conglomerates. They might have fewer staff, and they might have a more specialized vision for what they publish. So traditional markets tend to be very commercial. Their goal is to sell a lot of copies of whatever it is that they're publishing. Independent presses have a variety of goals. It might be to sell a lot of stuff, but it also might be to celebrate a certain type of art or a certain type of author demographic, or to highlight a certain genre or topic, etc. So there's a lot more granular detail and uniqueness here in the independent press sector. But those two types of publishers still operate very similarly in the sense that the author submits it, and then it's accepted or rejected, and then the publisher has the responsibility of actually publishing the piece. Whereas self-publishing is all on the author. The author is the publisher and fronts the cost to print and distribute the work. Or if they could just post it on their website or blog, and that's considered self-publishing also. So there are pros and cons to these different types of publishing here. For the sake of today, because we could do at least an hour on every type here, but for the sake of today, we're going to focus mostly on publishers of short works, so like short fiction, like 7,000 words and less, and poetry. And several of those qualify as independent presses, but please keep in mind that you do have options for how to publish your work here. It isn't just one route. I will discuss later in the presentation, we'll touch on books and novels and full-length works for those of you who are interested in that. But for the most part, this is going to be, how do I publish my short story? Where can I send this to? So what does the submission cycle actually look like? Well, first you have to actually write the piece. So you're going to draft the piece, revise it. I strongly recommend workshopping the piece, which means go find a writing group or create one, which is like a small group, usually like 4 to 6 people who agree to meet regularly, read each other's work, and give constructive feedback on it. And it's very helpful to have someone else's eyes on your work. This is something that many professional authors do on a regular basis. And then polish the piece. That means proofread it, clean it up, get it to the absolute highest quality that you can on your own before you submit it. Okay? And then once you're like, okay, I have this piece, it is where I want it to be, then you're going to research markets for fit, meaning you want to find a place where you can submit your story to that it fits really well. And we're going to talk about how to determine fit here in a little bit. But you want the piece to match the publication. You want them to kind of have the same values and character. You're going to read the guidelines for that specific market. I cannot stress this enough. You're looking for something called submission guidelines, and every publication will have a page somewhere, usually on their website, where they will go over in detail what they want you to do to submit to their piece or to submit to their publication. And these are things like how to format the piece, so like Times New Roman, 12-point font, etc. But it's also like, we don't publish horror or, stuff like that. So it's really important to read those guidelines to make sure that your piece is a good fit, but also to make sure that you get it into exactly the shape and format that the publisher is expecting. Then you're going to select one or more publications to send your work to that you are satisfied that it's a good fit for. Follow the guidelines to submit the piece. Now, some publications use submission systems like Submittable. That one's kind of the industry standard, I would say. Another one is Moksha. There's several different ones out there. Some actually just use email. Some of the really small publishers, the submission process will literally just be emailing the piece directly to the editor, and that's okay. I recommend recording your submission in your own notes, and I'll show you an example of that later, just to keep track of when you submitted it, and then later on you can track whether it was accepted or rejected. That process could actually take anywhere from like days to weeks or even months to hear back from the publication. I know it's hard to wait, but they get a lot of submissions and they have to go through them. And so it should say, though, on the publication website what their response time is. So it might say anywhere from like 1 to 3 weeks, or it might say up to 90 days or something like that. And then you'll know you should expect to hear back from them within that amount of time. So once you do hear back from them, it's going to either be an acceptance or a rejection. So if you got an acceptance, yay, congratulations. That's really awesome, and you should be very proud of that. Now, usually, if it's an acceptance, they will ask for edits. So what that means is the editor who's working with you will go through the piece and make comments and ask you to tweak things or change things, and will ask you to make those edits and then send it back to them. Now, you have the choice of whether to do that or not. If they ask for edits and you're like, I really don't want to change my story that way, you don't have to. You can decline and then it won't be published. Sometimes you can talk to them about it, but in my experience, editors know what they're talking about, and like 99% of the time, when they make a comment or when they suggest an edit, it's actually going to make your piece better and stronger. If you get an email with edits, I suggest sleep on it for at least a day before you actually go try to make the edits, and especially before you respond to the editor, because you'll be able to see it with fresh eyes, unless they specifically tell you they need it back quickly. And then the last two here have an asterisk by them because they happen sometimes, but not all of the time. So a lot of markets will have you sign a contract that assigns publication rights to that publisher for your piece for a specific amount of time, and in some cases that is in exchange for payment. And if that's the case, it will say that, in the contract. By the way, it should list whether or not it's a paying market in the submission guidelines when you're looking at it. So if they send you a contract, obviously read the whole thing. It's pretty standard for them to ask for rights for a certain amount of time. It might say something like first world publication rights for a period of 12 months or 18 months or 30 days or whatever, after which time the rights revert back to the author. And then it should list your specified payment. Now, again, not all markets are paying markets. Lots of literary journals that are run by universities and grad schools are not paying markets. So it just sort of depends on what you're looking at, and that's a choice that you can make. Do you want to be paid for your work or not? And just because it's a non-paying market doesn't mean it's not an important publication. Okay, so that's sort of the rundown of the process for acceptance. And again, until you sign the contract, you can still back out of that, but it's usually a really awesome thing to get an acceptance and to go through that process. If you get a rejection letter, it might come in the form of what's called a form letter or a form rejection, which doesn't give any specifics. It just says something along the lines of, unfortunately, we are not choosing to publish your piece at this time. Good luck in the future, or something like that. You could get what's called a personal rejection, which is where the editor speaks specifically to you or to your piece and gives details about, we really liked this about the piece, but it just doesn't fit this time around. Either way, usually rejections come through email. Regardless of what it says, you should not respond and argue with them. You want to just take it and move on. It's very unprofessional to ask for, why didn't you accept me? Or what if I change this? Will you take it then? That is definitely not something that you want to do. However, if you get a rejection, you are free then to resubmit that piece to a different market. Go find a different journal or magazine and submit it to them that you think it's a good fit for, and try again. This is a very common practice, and just because it's not accepted the first time doesn't mean it's a bad story. A lot of publications have a limit to how many pieces or how many words they can publish in each issue, and they might have 30 pieces that they really love and they really would love to publish, but they only have room for 6. And so they might have to, they narrow it down, and editors talk to each other, and they decide. And if it doesn't make the cut, it doesn't make the cut. But that doesn't mean that it was a bad story, or even that it was a bad fit for their publication. So don't be disheartened by a rejection. If you get several rejections from different markets, if that happens to me, I usually will then go back to the piece and consider revising it. So maybe I need to tweak something there. I might take it back to my writing group and workshop it again, and maybe tweak it some more. But that's totally up to you. I know some established professional authors who it took them 27 times of submitting a story until it found a home, until it was accepted. So how many times you want to do that is completely up to you. But some generally good advice is, like, if you believe in the story, if you like the story and you want to see it out there, then keep going until you find a home for it. Okay, so where do you find these markets to submit to? Well, there's lots of different ways to go about doing that. And the first suggestion that I have to you is just read widely in your genres. So one of the genres that I publish in is science fiction. So I have a subscription to Asimov's science fiction magazine, which I get in the mail. It's a beautiful print magazine, and it contains amazing stories. And I read it just to get a sense for what is being published in the genre that I love. I frequently go to Clark's World online and read the stories there, again, science fiction, just to sort of absorb the ambient literary awesomeness that is going on in your given genre. That doesn't mean that you should copy it or change your own voice, because one of the things that all publications want is unique stories with unique voices. And so you shouldn't ever feel like you have to change your own personal style, but it will allow you to see how your style fits in with what's already being published. And that's very important. The second suggestion is to read other authors' bios, the little blurb about them that's usually like at the bottom of the story, for where they have been published. So especially in a story that you really like. I subscribe to Daily Science Fiction, which is a publication that sends out an email every single day with a flash fiction story, just a really short story. You can read it really quick, and at the bottom they have a bio for the author. And if I really love that story, first of all, I'm going to go and I'm going to follow that author on like social media so that I can learn more about them and support their work in the future. But I'm also going to look to see if they mention any other publications where they've been published, especially if you find authors who kind of have something in common with your work. Then you can go and research those publications and maybe add them to your list of future markets that you might want to submit to. Authors generally only put the names of publications in their bios that they're really proud of. So it's a nice place to glean some names of some publications that maybe you didn't know existed. And then there's New Pages database, and this is an awesome database that you can use online. It's free, and it's a catalog of a bunch of different literary magazines, journals, websites, anthologies, a whole bunch of different places to publish work. And you can search by different factors or categories and things. You can search for things that are published online. You can search for print. And there's a little blurb or a little write-up about each market, and then there's a link that you can go check it out. So it's a great place to just find new publications that you didn't know existed. Or if you find the name of one somewhere else and you want to know more about it, New Pages is a great place to start, and then it can link you to that publication's website. Poets and Writers magazine and database is really helpful. The website pw.org is free to access. The magazine is a subscription, but I have found it to be very helpful. This is not an official endorsement, but it's just a recommendation of something that I found that's really helpful. But on here, you can find publications, you can find grad programs. I think they might even have a list of literary agents, and just a large selection of literary stuff that you can mine at your leisure. Duotrope, they definitely have literary agents, and then they also have an exhaustive list of publications, what we call open calls, which means like someone has posted, we are looking for stories on this subject by this deadline, of this length, and here's the pay rate, etc. And again, you can filter by different subjects and things like that, by genre, by deadline. Duotrope, I believe, has some functionality free, but to get the full functionality, you do have to subscribe to the website. Authors Publish Magazine is a website. You have to sign up, but it's free. You just put your email in, and they will send you periodically an email that has a list of different publishers. So one week it might be, here's a list of contests that are open in the month of March or something. Or it might be, here's a list of sci-fi publications. So sometimes they're themed, but they sort of like do some of the work of doing the research and gathering calls for publication or titles of publications that might be interesting to you. So again, it's kind of good for just wide-scale exposure. They also have some articles on craft and stuff that are pretty interesting. And then if you write genre fiction, like I do, so science fiction, fantasy, horror, that sort of stuff, Raylan.com is, I think it's just run by one guy, but it is an awesome database of specifically genre markets, and you can sort them by professional paying markets, semi-professional, etc. So I found that one to be very helpful also. You can also just go to Google and start typing stuff in, but for the list of databases that I have here on the screen, I know that they're vetted to some degree. That's not to promise that you're not going to get a bad one in there somewhere, but these folks are serious about putting together quality lists of publications. And then also just the more that you circulate in the literary community, the more you're going to hear about, new journals and that sort of thing. So you have all this giant list of possible markets. How do you find one to submit your story to? Well, you want to look for the right fit. And what that means is that the story matches the aesthetic and the style of that particular publication. So just like a restaurant has like a style of cuisine and they have certain flavors and certain culinary traditions that they follow, the same goes for publications. So they will list right on their submission guidelines what they're looking for, and sometimes it's extremely specific. It could be like, we're looking for very weird hybrid stories that challenge traditional format. Or it could be, we're looking for plot-driven stories that have a clear beginning, middle, and end, and that excite us with adventure. It could be, we're looking for stories about mermaids. It really just depends on what the publication is, and they're allowed to have whatever editorial direction they want. You just want to make sure you read that before you submit a story, because if you don't want to submit a story that's not about mermaids to the mermaid publication. So obviously acceptance is much more likely if you have a good fit. And you're kind of spinning your wheels and wasting your time if you're submitting the story to places it doesn't belong. Another way that it might not fit is the length of the story. So if they ask for, if they say they accept stories between 3,000 and 10,000 words, and yours is 15, do not submit it to that publication. Either get it down to 10, edit it down to 10,000, or go find a different publication that publishes 15,000 word stories. Because if it's not in the word count, it will get rejected outright. So how do you gauge fit? The best way to do that is to read the publication. Now, some publications have their content just sort of open online. You can just read all of their stories. Some of them will have some stories available for free, and then you get access to other ones through a subscription. Or even magazines that primarily have a paywall and you have to go through a subscription. A lot of times they'll have a sample issue available that you can look through to get a feel for what that publication is like and the type of stories that they're looking for. So look around on the website, see if you can find a sample issue to read, or for some of them that are primarily print, like the magazine of science fiction and fantasy, you can go into like Barnes and Noble or a bookseller and find that copy and just sort of flip through it and look to see what's there. Always, always, always read submission guidelines. You're going to hear this like 800 times in this presentation, but there's really nothing else you could do that would be more important to know what that publisher is looking for. Think about it like those are like the assignment directions. And so if you read through there and you're like, ooh, my story doesn't really fit that, find something else or revise your story. But if it doesn't fit, then you probably just want to find somewhere that it's going to fit better. Okay, so you find a market that you think is a good fit aesthetically and stylistically and topically. How do you know that it's a good market that you can trust? Or that it's a market that fits your specific publication goals, okay? So those are kind of two different problems. Can I trust them? And are they going to actually move me forward toward my goals? So here are some questions that you can ask and research about the market in order to determine that. So one of them is, how long has the publication been around? Have they existed for 50 years? Have they been around for 2 years? Did they just start up last month? This is totally personal preference of what you're more comfortable with. Me personally, I like to submit to markets that have been around at least a couple of years, so I know that they're likely to have a solid publication schedule and that they're likely to stick around. However, newer markets tend to be less selective, meaning it's sometimes easier to get accepted because they don't have large notoriety built up yet. Are they well known and respected? This is the prestige aspect, and again, this is total personal preference. Do you care whether or not readers, will be impressed by the fact that you're in this specific publication? The one I mentioned earlier, Asimov's, is one of the most well-known and long-standing and respected science fiction publications. To get a story published in there is a big deal in the science fiction world. Again, some people care about that sort of thing, some people don't, but it's good to sort of at least know where the market lands. How many volumes have they published? So again, do they have a track record? This is personal preference. I like to see that they have published on time, on schedule, for at least like 2 years for me to feel comfortable submitting to them. How regular is their publishing schedule? Do they put out issues on time? So it's good for you to know, do they publish once a year? Do they publish quarterly, which means 4 times a year? Do they publish every month? That doesn't matter as much as, are they actually putting out an issue as often as they say they are? So if they say they're quarterly, did they put out 4 issues last year, about at the same time? Now, delays happen sometimes, but overall, are they pretty regular? Which is going to be a good sign that they have a good process and they have an editorial team that knows what they're doing. Who runs them? This can vary widely. This might be a company. This could be a university that's run by grad students. This could be a single person who just started a publication. One of the most respected literary journals for a long time was called Glimmer Train, and it was run by two sisters who just started a publication, and they kind of ran it themselves. So that's not to say that like student-run publications or individuals are bad, and there are lots of examples of those that work well, but it's again worth at least knowing who is behind this and what how is their publication set up. Are they on a list of scams? This is, I always just Google them just to see if it pops up. And if you Google the name of the publication and the word scam, it might pop up if there's been a major issue with this publisher in the past, meaning they didn't publish people's stories on time and maybe just held them hostage, or they never got around to paying people, or there was some other issues. There's a website called Writer Beware that's run by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America that has a list of like sketchy publishers that you can check. It's not all inclusive, so that's not to say that that's you're necessarily going to find it there, but it's, if you're not sure about a publication, it's worth doing your due diligence here. Does their publication match my writing style and aesthetic? We kind of talked about that with fit. This is one of the most important things. If the answer to this is no, you should probably find a different market, because they're probably going to reject it if those don't match. Would I be proud to have this publication credit? This is something that's relevant, I think, to new writers especially. Is this a publication that you would be proud to have your story in, and when you're looking at other pieces that have been published there, do you want your work next to theirs? And I mention this because you don't have to say yes to every opportunity that comes, and it's also okay to wait for a publication that you will be proud for. Sometimes it's easy to think in the beginning like any publication is better than none, but really you want to feel proud of where your work is, because again, it's going to be situated there for a while and people will be accessing it through that publication. So you want it to be something you're proud of. And how would you tell whether or not you'd be proud? That goes into the next question. Do the publication's values match mine? So depending on what they stand for, and sometimes those will be listed on their website, but the type of content that they say they want, their practices in how they run their business, do those match up with yours? And if they do, I think that's a good sign that this is going to be something that you would be proud to list on your website. I have been published in this place. So there are other things that you can consider, but here are a good list of things to keep in mind. I recommend keeping a list of markets, especially when you're new to this. Keep a list of markets that you have found that you are interested in. Just make a Google Doc or whatever, so that once you found them, you'll be able to get back to them again. Put the little URL to the submission guidelines page so you can come back to them in the future. Okay, so you go to the market website and you read their submission guidelines. There's going to be some terminology that you will come across over and over again, and there are things that you want to pay attention to. And sometimes you could even think of them as like toggle switches, like do they allow this or do they not? I'm going to just define some of the basic ones here. So a publication will either allow simultaneous submissions or not, and that means, can you submit that particular piece to more than one publication at a time? So if I'm submitting a piece to Asimov's, are they okay with me at the same time submitting that same piece to Clarkesworld? And so if they say yes, we're okay with simultaneous submissions, then I can submit it to both places at the same time. Usually there'll be a line that just says, if your piece is submitted elsewhere, please let us know as soon as possible. So you'll basically withdraw it from the other place if it gets picked up at a different publisher. If they say no, then that means that piece can only be at that publication until they either reject or accept it, and then you're free to send it wherever you want. Multiple submissions means, can you submit more than one piece to that particular publisher? So can I submit 2 stories at the same time to Asimov's in particular? That's what multiple submissions mean. And again, a publisher can allow this or not. It's completely up to you. Just for my own sanity and my ability to keep track of all of these, I tend not to do simultaneous submissions. I usually send a story to one place at a time, just so it's easy for me to keep track, but that's totally your personal preference. Response time is how long you can expect them to take to get back to you on whether they're accepting or rejecting the piece. It should say somewhere on their website or their submission guidelines, expect a response within 4 to 10 weeks, or within, if you haven't heard from us in 4 months, then you can query, which means just email them and ask for an update. Sometimes the response time could be less than a day. I think the fastest one I had was within 5 hours. I had an email in my inbox that they were accepting it. And it could also take, months. So it just kind of depends. But you want to know what to expect so that you know when to kind of check back to see whether or not they're going to respond. Again, the response is usually going to come through email. So they will notify you. If we're talking about short fiction, they should notify you one way or the other. Occasionally, really large publications will say, if you don't hear from us in 3 months, consider it a rejection, but most of them are actually going to give you a response of some kind. If it's a paying market, they should list a pay rate, and that's usually given per word. So it'll say 8 cents per word or 4 cents per word. For science fiction and fantasy, 8 cents a word is considered the professional rate at the moment. That's set by Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. Many literary publications are non-paying markets, so just be aware of that. Demographics. Some markets or calls, like for anthologies, are only open to certain groups. So you might have to be a citizen of Canada to submit to this particular magazine. Or they might have an open call specifically for writers of color. They might be doing an issue that they want specifically people who have a background in healthcare or in education. It really varies widely, but obviously make sure that you fit the demographics that they're looking for. If it doesn't specify, then it's open to anyone. But a lot of times they'll say if you need to have a certain citizenship or something to submit. Formatting guidelines. This is font, spacing, etc. Follow these exactly. If it's not specified, if it doesn't say anything about formatting guidelines, then use Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, or just use standard manuscript format, which you can just Google this and it'll be either Times New Roman or Courier, 12-point font, double spaced, 1-inch margins, and there's a special header thing that you do on the first page for standard manuscript format. And again, you can just Google this. There's all kinds of templates online, but they may or may not want that. I had a publication that wanted it in Verdana 11. That's the font that they wanted, and I put it in Verdana 11 because you do not want to give them any reason to reject it for not following directions. If they're asking for it, there's a reason, just go with it, okay? Some publications will ask for a brief cover letter, especially if you're using Submittable to submit your piece. There might be a box that says cover letter. This is not a full-blown cover letter like you would do for a resume or a job application. It's a tiny little blurb like the example that I have here on the screen that literally has these pieces of information. You can say, "Dear editor." If you happen to know the editor's name, you can put their name in there, but otherwise just say, "Dear editor, please consider my story," and then put the name of the story or the poem or whatever it is you're submitting, and then give the genre and the approximate word count. Do not go into a long explanation of what the story is about. Do not give spoilers. Just list the name, the genre, and the word count. And then the second paragraph is just a couple lines about who you are, if you have any publication credits, and any information about you that is relevant to this particular story. So here I have a sci-fi piece listed. So in this second paragraph, I put, "My fiction has been published by Simon & Schuster, Flash Fiction Online, and others." If you have like 20 publication credits, only list a couple of them here. I currently write for Star Trek Adventures Gameline. If you're writing a story about horses and you have owned horses for 50 years, or you're a professional rider or something, that would be relevant for you to put there, just so they know that you have a background in the subject that is in the story. If you don't have any publication credits, you literally can just put, "This would be my first publication." That's relevant for them too. And you should also know that not being published yet doesn't hurt you. A lot of publications are actually excited to get to be the first publication to publish you if they like your work. So that's not going to be a strike against you, but you can list that there. And then sincerely your name. That's all you got to do for if they ask for a cover letter, but some places don't. An author bio, some places will ask for this up front, some will ask only once your piece is accepted, but this usually gets printed below your story. And it's just a brief statement about who you are, a few publication credits if you have them, and then where to find you, so like your website or your social media. If it's not specified, you want to plan for about 50 words for a bio. So here's an example, one from me. Kelly Fitzpatrick is an author and English teacher in mid-Michigan. Her publications include a Star Trek story from Simon & Schuster and stories in Flash Fiction Online and KYSO Flash. She runs several writing groups and serves on the Saginaw Bay Writing Project. Connect at kellyfitzpatrick.com and at kellyfitzwrites. So I have who I am, my careers, a couple places where I've been published, and then something that is important to me, which is my involvement in community projects. So again, if you don't have any publications yet, you might list some of your interests or the things that you're passionate about. It's really just sort of for people to get an idea of who you are and where they can find more of your work. So it is important there, ideally, if you have some kind of online presence, to list that so that people can connect with you. Because if they really like your story, they're going to want to go read more of it. So they're going to want to know where to find you. Okay, so Submittable is, like I said, the industry standard platform. It's a system that publishers use to collect manuscripts, to collect submissions. Authors need a free account to submit their work, but the publisher is paying to use Submittable, but it's free for you, but you do have to create an account with your email. And then once you have an account, every story or piece that you submit will get an entry and it will be recorded in your Submittable account, and you can actually see whether it's under review. It'll be flagged if it's accepted or rejected. However, that's not usually, once you submit it through Submittable, that's not usually where you're going to interact with the publisher. Sometimes it is. Sometimes they want you to go in there and do things, but like one publisher had their contract in there for me. I had to go into Submittable to find that, but a lot of times they're just going to use email. But it is important that you have a Submittable account and that you know how to, navigate it. So I'm just going to show you like a screenshot of what Submittable looks like, so you can just kind of see. But it is pretty straightforward. And so you will access this through the publisher's website. So when you're ready to submit, you're going to go to, if I'm going to submit to the Adroit Journal, I'm going to go to their submission guidelines page, and then there should be like a link or a button for me to click on that says submit, and usually that will take me to their submittable page. I'll have to log in, and then I'm able to submit my piece from there. Okay, so once you've gone through the submission process on the publication's website, you will have gone through the Submittable process if they're using Submittable, and then you can come in and view your submission. So when you're logged in on Submittable, you can click on Submissions, and then you can view all submissions, your active ones, accepted, declined, etc. Now I just sort of handpicked 3 examples here to show you. Here's a story that I submitted to an NYC Midnight contest, and it is currently being judged, so you can see the little blue in progress tag there. This is a poem that got rejected from Constellation, so you can see it's declined, and then this is a story that was accepted by KYSO Flash. You can see the date that you submitted it, and then if you click on the title, it will give you can actually see the file you submitted, and then sometimes there's messages that go back and forth between you and the editors. There's also this Discover tab up here that allows you to go in and search for active calls for submission. Some publications come in here and list things that you can search for. I think the databases I showed you earlier are more comprehensive and reliable, but this is here as a tool that you can use. So I don't spend a lot of time going back and looking at this. As I said, most publications are going to email you with a decision, and then you'll use the email to correspond with the editor, but occasionally they want to do everything through Submittable, so you should be comfortable with coming in and knowing how to navigate in here. But even though this will track individual submissions, I still recommend that you have a way to track all of your submissions across all platforms, and I recommend doing that in a spreadsheet. And so here's an example of how to do it in Google Sheets. So you would list the name of the submission. So this is just like the name of the poem or the story or whatever it is you're submitting. The details, so I put genre and word count in here. If I get paid, eventually I'll list the amount that I got paid, so $60 for a story or whatever. And then each column here is an attempt of submitting it to a different publication. So this allows me to track one story's entire submission history, which isn't really possible in Submittable. And then I color code them. So these are all fake examples. These are not real publications here, okay? But this is just an example of how it would look if I submitted it to this magazine. I list the date that I submitted it, the response time, so that's how long they say they will take to get back to me, and then if it's rejected, I come in and put the date that it was rejected, just so I can kind of see how long this publication takes. And then I color code it. So red means rejected, green means it is submitted, it's sold, so that one's done, and then yellow means it is currently under submission and the publication is reviewing it, so I have to wait still. So you don't have to do this, but it helps me to kind of see where each story is in the process, and to know, okay, like this one, I can go back and either revise it or just send it out. I need to find another place to send this one. So it just sort of helps me stay organized and is fairly easy to track. You can also use this to keep track of getting paid. So for the publications that you sell that have a payment attached to them, I'll make this green once I actually receive that payment. Just a quick note here on novels and books. They work a little bit differently than short fiction and poetry. Normally, to get a novel traditionally published through a publishing house, you're going to go through a literary agent. So that just means that instead of submitting directly to the publisher, you're going to submit your work to a literary agent, and you can kind of do your research and shop around and find one that you are interested in, that you think would represent your work well and that matches your genre, etc. You submit it's usually like a sample, and they have submission guidelines just like publishers do, and then they get back to you, and if they offer to work with you, then they become your representative and they shop your manuscript around to the publishers. So they're your representative. If you get a publishing deal on the book, you as the author usually will get an advance, and that's sort of like money in advance from what they expect the book to make. And then down the road, after you earn out the advance, after you make that amount of money, then after that you'll earn royalties on any further sales, which is like a small percentage. And then in return for being your representative, the agent gets a commission on the sale. So whatever the book sold for to the publisher, agents usually get around 15%. I told you that the publication process can take a while. That is even more true for novels and book length works. So just keep that in mind. But it's sometimes helpful to have some experience submitting to small publishers if you are interested in doing novels and books also. All right, just a few additional tips here. Practice literary stewardship. This just means practice being authentic, building real, honest relationships with other creators versus the mentality of like trying to hustle and sell yourself and your work. Publication moves very slowly, so be patient. They will get back to you eventually. Publishing is a very small world, and editors talk to each other. Always be professional. Try not to burn bridges. Workshops, conferences, and conventions are extremely helpful to learn and network. So if you have the means and the opportunity to attend those, I cannot stress how helpful it is to sort of build a network of like-minded folks who are interested in writing and publishing. And then I said this earlier, I'll say it again, read, especially in the genre you want to be published in, because you will absorb much. And then finally here, I want to give you some takeaways. There are many reasons to publish. Spend some time deciding what your goals are for your writing, and then make decisions that support that. The submission cycle is long but rewarding. Don't be daunted by rejection letters. They're just part of the process for all writers. Stay organized, track your submissions, own your process. There are many resources out there that explain the publishing process. Feel free to take advantage of them. Again, this was just sort of an overview. Some more places that you might go to learn more about this are the Writing Excuses podcast. This is skewed a little bit for science fiction and fantasy, but much of what they go over is relevant for all types of story writing. Authors Published magazine, I mentioned that earlier, it's very helpful. Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America has a blog, and it's very informational. Writer's Digest has a website, and they also publish a series of books that sort of go over like literary agents. They have guides to publishing, lots of resources there. You can also go directly to publisher blogs and newsletters. So Tor.com, for example, has a really great blog. Follow your favorite authors and publishers on social media. They will be talking about their process, and you can learn a lot just from following them. And then an optional activity you can do here at the end on your own, spend 15 to 20 minutes doing a publication search using the New Pages database, Poets and Writers website, Submittable, or Duotrope, and make a list of 5 to 10 publications that look interesting that you might want to submit to in the future, and then go check out their sample issues if possible.
Thank you for joining us for this workshop on how to publish your writing. The Community Writing Center offers a number of other writing workshops, along with free consultations on any piece of writing. To learn more, please visit our website at communitywritingcenter.com. Thank you.